Can I now ask Don to come up here to receive his award?
So you said go out for a run.
Several years ago, a particular class, one of my student evaluations was particularly interesting. It said, prof tends to wander. He should stick closer to his lecture notes if he has any. Really couldn't talk about these notes. Brian Langell didn't put it in quite these words, but my winning of this award is squarely in the best or the worst labor law tradition. A total triumph of seniority over ability. But really, more broadly, it's a much appreciated recognition of the work that most of us have done, that many of us at the Queen's Law faculty have been doing in this field for a very long time. I'll come back to that in a moment, but first I have to say a word about Ron McCallum. I mean, can you imagine how wonderful it is to have a long-term friend and colleague like Ron, who's come halfway around the world for this occasion? Just amazing. You know, I used to be convinced that the fact that Ron did his graduate work in our faculty had very little to do with his enormous success, and that he'd have done just as well if he'd have studied anywhere else. But quite recently I saw something that made me reconsider that. Last year, Ron was the main author of a review of the Australian Fair Wages Act, which had been passed several years earlier by the Labour government, the government that just got kicked out a few weeks ago. The employer community had been very critical of the Fair Wages Act, and Ron's report said that most of those criticisms are unfounded, that the Act treated employers fairly and they should basically just stop whining. Well, I happened to read a discussion of Ron's report on a website called Crikey. And one of the commentators said the following, and I quote, "For almost 40 years, the main author of this report, or Ron, has specialized in disguising politics as legal analysis." So maybe we have more of an impact on Ron than we thought. Bill Angus, my labor law teacher from 53 years ago at the University of Alberta. Bill, as Brian Langell quoted me as saying, Bill was simply the best prof I ever had anywhere. He made me realize that doing law is not like playing with a Rubik's Cube, that it's not just a matter of logic, that it's infused with values and goals and ideals. He joined the U of A Law Faculty as his first teaching job in my second year in 1960-61. He introduced a great labor law seminar, as Brian said, using Bora Laskin's casebook. The first time it had ever been taught there. It got me excited about this field, and I guess I could say the DNA of Bill's seminar is all over this evening. And Bill, thank you ever so much. I want to mention, in terms of seniority, the person in the room that I've known by far the longest, my cousin Shauna Dorskin, who was practically a sister to me when I was growing up in Edmonton. She was a librarian at the U of T for many years. Her father was a cantor who tried to train me for my bar mitzvah. Poor man.
Oh yeah.
Almost
sing.
did him in.
He can't sing.
Whenever I get frustrated with a weak and unmotivated student, I think back almost 65 years ago to what Shauna's dad went through with me. Queens. I've been on the Queen's Law faculty. I've been here for 50 years next year. The faculty has stood by me through all the ups and downs in my life. The Queen's spirit, the best example of the Queen's spirit I've ever seen occurred actually, and this is a true story, in my very, very first class that I ever taught in family law. I didn't know anything about family law. I just wasn't smart enough to put it down as a subject I refused to teach. So I got assigned, but fortunately I had met the graduating class, the third year class the night before at a party at the old law house. Jus prima noctis, it used to be called. I won't translate that term. To not get into trouble if I translated it. And I met, and the next day I came in to teach family law for the first time. I had my notes all written out. I didn't know anything about the field. I just, and I put my hands in my pockets and started reading my lecture notes, and I thought maybe I better establish eye contact with the class. So I looked up, and there was a fellow in the second row sitting there like this. I fortunately knew his name from the party that I was Pete Colson, who became a very eminent judge in Napanee. And Mr. Colson, is something wrong? He said in his grave voice, "Wow, sir, if you'd read a little more slowly, we'd get the material from your notes and our notes a lot better." What a great lesson for the very first class I ever taught. That really is the Queen's spirit. And I've had superb labor law colleagues over the years. I mean, just to mention a few. There's Christine, Brian's mentor, Dawn, a little more about Dawn later. Marty Gorski, Ken Swan, Sarah Slynn, Tom Cutner, who's here tonight. Then just in the last 3 years, we've set up our new Labor Law Center. Don't let the fancy name put you off. It's understandable that Ron's sort of gagging a little over the name. And Center for Law in the Contemporary Workplace means Labor and Employment Law Center. Kevin Banks, the director of the center, as well as being a very fine scholar and great colleague. He's a totally unflappable planner and administrator. We have an amazing senior fellow, Elizabeth Shelton, gifted scholar, leading practitioner, and just this year, Wanjiru Njoya has joined us after having taught for several years at Oxford and LSE. Wanjiru's specialty is the interface between corporate governance and employment, and look in another year or two for a conference possibly on that subject area by our center. And even closer, head of a plug here, look for the privacy conference that we've got coming up just next month, November the 21st and 22nd, right here in Toronto. I gather we could use a few more registrations. That conference. This center is actually the brainchild of our dean, Bill Flanagan. Bill is here tonight. He's kind of an honorary labor lawyer. If you met him, you know how resourceful and determined he is. He just had appointed for his third term as dean, first dean we've ever had, and actually enjoyed doing the job. We couldn't have set the center up without Bill's initiative, and we couldn't run it without the help of our superb advisory committee, and especially the two co-chairs, Hugh Christie and Jeffrey Sack. Hugh's a quintessential long-term Queen's loyalist. never seen anyone who can work so well with absolutely everybody. And Jeffrey Sack, well, a lot of you know Jeffrey. Jeffrey is always Jeffrey. We've worked together in one way or another for 40 years. I'm always amazed by his rapid-fire ideas and his passion for labor law. No one else has tried harder to encourage scholarship in our field. In terms of institutions in our field, our new center is of course closest to my heart, but I have to mention a couple of others that have become absolutely key to scholarly work in labor law and in industrial relations. CRIMT at the University of Montreal, the Inter-University Center for Globalization and Work, Gregor Murray's operation, which has an incredible worldwide research network based at the University of Montreal, and is doing groundbreaking work on a huge range of very important and interesting labor law issues. Of special interest to me is the comparative work it's doing on new models of workplace representation, models that might supplement or replace our aging and alien Wagner model. And the other newer entrant in the field, the Labor Law Research Network, Brian has had a big hand in this. Brian and his former student guide, Davidoff, one of the best comparative labor law scholars in the world, they've set up a huge and very effective network of scholars around the world in this field, and that had just a wonderful conference 3 or 4 months ago in Europe. So this field, which tended to sort of be on a bit of a downward slide with the drop in collective representation, is now coming back up again. Don Carter. Don was in the first labor law class I taught. When he became chair of the RLRB in the 70s, he still looked too young to drink coffee, let alone anything else. He was dean of the faculty in the mid-90s, one of the toughest times in our history, the gender wars era, which has already been referred to. His time in the Labor Board served extremely well when he was dean. He learned a lot from employer conduct and all those unfair labor practice cases. And he used a shrewd combination of coercion and co-optation to get our faculty through that crisis. Then there were severe financial constraints, and Don scraped up savings everywhere. When it came to pursuing a low-cost strategy, Walmart had nothing or no. Several of the winners of this award in the past have been eminent arbitrators. Don fits right into that category. It's true that I did some arbitration on and off for a long time. I guess my heart was never really in it, and my reputation was, to put it mildly, mixed. Just one example, around 1990, I wrote a Canada Post Award where I expounded on a certain issue. I won't tell you the facts. You don't want to hear the facts in those old Canada Post cases. So then you should just keep hoping the mail will get delivered the next day. Then a year or two after my award, Michel Pichet, was one of the most eminent arbitrators in the country, had another Canada Post case that raised the same issue. And in his award, he quoted a few sentences from mine. You could tell that he was sort of holding them out at arm's length. And then he said, and I quote, "In fairness to that respected arbitrator," you can tell where he's going. That is exactly where he went. Rick Baldwin, Law 72, great friend ever since his first year in law school, as well as one of the most liked and respected practitioners in our field. It's now 41 years since we struggled through that rock climbing lesson in the French Alps. Rick, and your little toddler buddy that summer, my son Simon, is here with his partner Katrina. I just have, this on a much sadder note, I just have to mention someone who's not with us anymore. You all know his work, Jeff England. Jeff died prematurely 2 years ago. He had a fantastic, larger-than-life personality. He was the most dedicated and productive employment law scholar we've ever had. And if we lived in a fair world, I'd be sitting down there right now, and Jeff would be up here getting this award. And when he was at Queen's for a while, 30 years ago, he was a great buddy for 2 little kids, my stepsons, Nathan and Eric Barron, who are here tonight with their partner and spouses. Fortunately, an excellent scholar, a graduate of ours, who's here tonight all the way from Saskatchewan, Peter Barnacle, is carrying on some of the most important parts of Jeff's work. And I have to mention a couple of former mature students of mine who come all the way from Vancouver, Peter Cameron and Peter Burton. I encountered that they were in graduate class that I taught in the Osgood Professional Development Labor Law Program. And Brian Langell came and spoke to that class, and the interaction in that class between those 2 eminent senior labor practitioners and Brian Langell was one of the absolute highlights of my teaching career. If you've worked with me in the last few years, you probably know me best as a journal editor, and as Brian pointed out, a pretty grumpy and picky one. My biggest academic delight over the past 20 years has been working with incredibly able and dedicated teams of students on our 2 journals. First, the Queen's Law Journal, and second, the Canadian Labour and Employment Law Journal, which is now a collaborative effort of Lancaster House and our new centre. The 5 current student editors from those journals are here tonight. 2 editors-in-chief of the Queen's Law Journal, 3 senior editors of the CLELJ, and also a great delight to see Martha Drassenauer here. Martha was one of the first student editors-in-chief that I worked with on the Queen's Law Journal. Martha's been at the WSIAT for a very long time. Now, I was going to talk about some of my own ideas for labor law reform that have gotten absolutely nowhere in the years. One that would be very popular here with three tables of arbitrators was the argument that I made in a report I wrote for the Law Firm Commission back in 1991 that the default forum for grievance arbitration should not be private arbitration, privately paid, privately appointed arbitrators, but a public tribunal with the parties free to opt for private arbitration if they wanted to. Well, when it leaked out that I was going to make that recommendation, the Ontario Labour Management Arbitrators Association, Ken Swan was for many years the chairman for life of the Ontario Labour Management Arbitrators Association. Fortunately, he's outlived his chairmanship. But, you know, what's the strongest union in Ontario? You talk about Unifor, you talk about QP, but the OLNA is the strongest union in Ontario, and always has been. As soon as they heard of my recommendation, they immediately commissioned Michel Pichet and Alan Moll to do a study purportedly showing how efficient labor arbitration really is. And Ken Swan, and you might remember about the same time when the Harris government rolled back almost all of the changes the Ray government had made to the Ontario Labour Relations Act, Ken Swan managed to cajole or charm the Labour minister, Elizabeth Whitmer into leaving in the provision that gave arbitrators the power to apply employment-related statutes. This, of course, paved the way for Parry Sound, which gave arbitrators a prominent place at the most abundant feeding trough of all. The human rights trough. And some people have actually even been arguing that arbitrators should have exclusive access to that. So far, the Supreme Court has been far too astute to accept that argument. Let's leave the ashes of the rest of my ideas to rest in peace, just like those. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ron, ever so much. I'm really just blown away by how many of you have come here tonight to honor Don and me. It's wonderful to get this award with with the student who was in the first labor law class I taught. You've been a wonderful colleague all these years. This is the highlight of my career, and I'm just tremendously grateful.